Hello, this is Rainer Koschnick from Germany, and I love alternative comics. This episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by Patreon supporters like me. Enjoy the show.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 153, reviews of The Dharma Punks, My Hot Date, Tokyo Ghost #1, and FutureFantasteek #16. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode of the podcast, we're going to look at several new or relatively new comics. First, we're going to look at the graphic novel from Ant Sang, The Dharma Punks. After that, we're going to take a look at Noah Van Sciver's My Hot Date. Following that, we're going to look at the new comic from Rick Remender and Sean Murphy, Tokyo Ghost, issue #1. And then we're going to wrap up with a brief discussion of a zine called FutureFantasteek, issue #16. But before we get to those titles, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you're going to find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible, unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price. Sometimes it's 50% off, but many times you're going to find discounts that are much more impressive than that.
Yep, this month for September, they've got a bunch of DC Kids bundle and a Marvel Kids bundle, both at 50% off. Other DC bundles, DC Now series bundle #1 at 50% off and 2 at 50% off. There's a returning series bundle with Looney Tunes variant covers at 50% off. That's at 45% off. There's even a Vertigo bundle at 75% off and another Vertigo bundle at 50% off. So lots of percents off all over the place.
It's percentage off Wonderland is what it is. And you find that every single month, not just at September, but every month at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do pre-order your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and specifically tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's the way to do it.
How have things been going with you, Gene?
Pretty good. Busy, working on work, working on drawing, working on the comics exhibits that are going to be at the Northwestern University Library in a little over a week at this point. So keeping super busy.
Well, you're not as busy as you had been because you're on more episodes of the podcast, so that's good.
Yeah, well, I'm actually more busy. I'm just cramming more into the same amount of time.
Okay, so you're managing your time better.
Or I'm not getting as much sleep, one of the two.
Okay. So you're sacrificing for the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I give my all.
Wow.
And how about you?
What a dedicated fellow.
Oh, yeah. And how's the new job going?
It's going really well, and I think I've acclimated to the classes for this semester. This past week, I just got my office furniture, so hey,
you actually
I'm all ready and set to go.
You have a place to actually do your work now.
Yeah, well, actually, I did have a place to do my work. I just didn't have anything outside of a simple table and chair. But, in fact, my office is not the only one that was getting new furniture. Where I am, in the program, the Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communication program at UT Dallas, there are a lot of offices in my area that were getting new furniture. So, kind of a big turnover.
Oh, okay.
Furniture-wise, that is. But so that's going really well. So we've got some news in comics alternative land I want to share before we get to our reviews for this week.
Okay.
One of the creators whose work that we had previously discussed on the podcast, Andres Bergen, wrote to let us know that issue number 8 of his comic Trista and Holt will be coming out the very beginning of October, so that's an update there. And if you want to find out more about Andres's comics, you can go to his website, If Comics. That's IF question mark and then COMMIX. So he does some really interesting things. And then someone who writes reviews for the Comics Alternative blog was recently blurbed in a press release.
Nice.
In fact, it was for something that she actually wrote for the Comics Alternative. Beth C., who has been reviewing books for us for the past year, almost exactly a year ago, reviewed a book by Liz Climo called Little World of Liz Climo, and she found out just a few days ago that her endorsement, or at least a blurb from her review, was in the press release endorsement section of something that they recently published. And her name actually wasn't given, but it was credited to the Comics Alternative.
Branding.
That's it. So, Beth, congratulations on that, even though your name was not on the press release from Running Press, the publisher. But the Comics Alternative name was on there, and this is about the third or fourth time we've had a Comics Alternative endorsement used in the press. So that's good.
Getting the name out there, and good for her for writing something interesting enough for the publisher to pick up. That's fun.
That's right. That's right. So, Gene, let's start talking about this week's comics, and maybe we can get blurbed in future press releases.
Okay, and we're going to start with Ant Sang's Dharma Punks.
The Dharma Punks. This is coming out on September 21st from Conundrum, and we have an early review copy. We're going to be discussing this book. Before we get started into the detail, I have to just come right out and say this is one of the most exciting things that I've read this year so far.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a meaty thing. It's 400 pages. Unfortunately, my print copy didn't show up in time, but we've got a PDF to go through. But 400 pages in PDF is a chunk of stuff. But it's a very lyrical sort of storytelling style. And for a brief description of it may not sound like it's all that much, but Ant Sang does a lot with really thinking about the characters in ways that most people, I think, don't get to in books. And partially it's sort of the length, and partially it's just that the kind of thematic preoccupations of the book. It's not just the plot. The plot is there for us to think about stuff, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in trying to describe this book, you started off by talking about its length. I mean, this is a beefy narrative. It clocks in at over 400 pages, a tad over 400 pages. And by the way, I do have my hard copy, so I can easily flip through. So if we need a specific page reference, just ask me, and I can look at it. But Dharma Punks originally appeared as an 8-issue comic book series between 2001 and 2003. And then before that, Sang had discussed or used some of these characters, or at least the protagonist, whose name is Chopstick, in a mini-comic that he created back in the mid-1990s called Filth. And, I had not heard of Ant Sang before I saw this book solicited several months ago. But apparently Ant Sang has quite a following in New Zealand. In fact, one of New Zealand's most noted creators, at least one of the most noted creators that we know on this side of the Atlantic or Pacific, is Dylan Horrocks, and he writes the introduction to this book. A really nice one, by the way. Yeah,
I may have run across Ant's stuff earlier on, like maybe in the late 90s, and I may have picked up a stray copy of Filth somewhere along the line. Or in Dylan, I think it was Dylan who put together a book on New Zealand comics, kind of like a kind of short handbook, I think in the late 90s or early 2000s, and I'm sure he would have been included in there as well. So I knew a little bit, but I really wasn't familiar with the story at all before I jumped into it.
You know, I take this back. I was familiar with some of the work of Ant Sang because I'd almost forgotten about this. About a year or so ago, Kunka and I looked at several issues of the New Zealand anthology Faction, and I just remembered that he was a part of at least one or two of those collections, I believe.
Okay.
But so, yeah, it's been a while, and God, now I'll have to go and fish out those older issues of Faction that we looked at. But this is the first sustained narrative that I've read of his. And like I said, I'm really impressed. It's, on the surface, I think, it's a fairly straightforward story, or at least the story that takes place throughout most of the narrative, where you have the protagonist Chopstick and then friends of his are planning on committing some kind of anarchist event. Okay, there is in their hometown. I guess this is a fast food franchise, kind of like Burger King or McDonald's. It's called Bobo's.
Right.
And they're going to open a new store, and it's going to be a big event. It's going to draw a lot of crowds. There's going to be a lot of celebration, a lot going on, kind of a carnival atmosphere. And what their plans are is to plant a relatively harmless, so to speak, bomb that will produce I guess kind of a small localized explosion. And so when the shop, Bobo's, was planning on releasing all of these balloons from its roof with the Bobo symbol on it, what they would do when the roof opened is actually ignite that explosion. So instead of getting balloons going all over the place, you would just have this limited explosion up at the very top of the building. Now, a limited explosion, localized, that's still an explosion. But Chopstick and his friends convince themselves that, really nothing too bad will go on, but they're going to be making a statement. Now, little known to them, Chopstick and his friends, is that the person who is really behind all of this, and the guy who is, I guess, the mastermind of this terrorist, we can call it that, event, is named Jugga. And he and people who work closely with him are actually going to be using a much stronger grade explosive, a C4 explosive. And Chopstick and his friends don't learn this until toward the very end, right before the explosion is to take place. Now, all of this happens over around a 24-hour period, maybe a little longer than that. So on the surface, I think this is a not overly complex narrative, but there's a lot more going on in this story than just that simple storyline that I just mentioned, right? Right.
Yeah. Well, we were talking a little bit off mic beforehand, trying to just lay out the narrative time frames of this book, because something like I was going to bring up when we were talking earlier, kind of like Mouse. If you're familiar with, I hope you're familiar with our Spiegelman's graphic novel Mouse. I would hope there are
me or the listener,
everybody, Mouse, or even the novel Frankenstein. There are these nested narratives sometimes. There's kind of like a present time, but then there are different time frames above and below that, and this book deals with that as well. And again, we talked about the very beginning, the very end seems to be kind of one very straightforward time frame. Then there's the bulk of the book, but then there's a flashback as well. At least one flashback, maybe two, maybe three. It's a little hard to tell sometimes. But and there's these things are all kind of they're not really cued very clearly, because our only narrator is Chopstick himself. So we don't have a narrator to come say meanwhile or 5 years ago. Things are just kind of done graphically. And because we've got 400 pages, these transitions sometimes will take 2 or 3 pages to move from one time frame to another in often very poetic ways.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, I went back through this book right before we started the recording. and I was able to pinpoint, or at least figure out, 4 distinct time events. I take back the word pinpoint because there's one that I can't determine what that is. But 3 that I think are pretty clear is the current main narrative time, and that is this 24-hour or so period when they're going to set off an explosion at the grand opening of Bobo's, okay? What I just described a moment ago. A much more contemporary time frame is, as you mentioned, the current moment in which Chopstick is telling us the story of these past events. And at this point, he is years away from this event, and he's telling the story from a cafe. And I can't tell if the cafe is in London. I know that toward the end of the Bobo's explosion storyline, he is going to be getting away to London. So this may be where he currently lives, but he is temporally a distance from the events that take place during, Bobo's grand opening. And then another time period, a third time period we get is years before the Bobo event, if we can call it that, and that is when Chopstick and his friends Tracy and Brian meet someone by the name of Hiroshima, a young woman who is a goth, I guess you could call her that, a very heavy philosophical thinker, and she actually does have a philosophical impact on Chopstick, which we can go into detail about in a moment. In the events that happened with her. And so these are 3 distinct time markers in the Dharma punks. So there's the time when Chopstick and his friends met Hiroshima years ago, several years after that, and where most of the events take place in this book, the time of Bobo's grand opening and their attempts to have this anarchist mark of the time, if you want to call it that. And then the most contemporary moment, the narrating moment, when Chopstick is looking back on all of these events, both the time with Bobo's grand opening and even before when they first met Hiroshima, and telling us the story from a distance of several years later. Okay, so those are 3 distinct time periods. Now, there's one other time period that occurs twice in the book. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out exactly when this is taking place or who is the main character. If the first instance of this time is in Chapter 2, it's how Chapter 2 opens. This is on page 47. And here we see a young woman who is waiting in a van, and it looks like a hippie van because it has like peace signs and paisley painted on the side. Or I guess this is paisley. It looks paisley. This is a black and white comic. And she's waiting for something, or she's waiting for someone. And then later on page 330, and this is in Chapter 7, we see this van sitting outside while a guy, a man with a mustache, and that's all I know about him, the mustache guy, he says something to his young daughter whom he calls Princess. He says, "Princess, Daddy has to go. People are going to say things about your father, but don't believe them. I don't want to have to go, but I need to." And then the little girl says, "Don't go," and she starts to cry. That's all we know of that particular time, that fourth time that I can't pin down. Now, I don't know when this takes place, nor do I know who that little girl is. Now, is the little girl this aforementioned woman Hiroshima? Because Hiroshima is rather nihilistic, and given what happens to her in this book, it wouldn't surprise me that this may be her. Or is this little girl another character that we encounter, someone who is called Mute, M-E-W-T, and she is mute. In fact, she communicates through a little tablet, a little writing board. Or is this little girl one of Chopstick's friends called Tracy, who is actually a prominent character in this book? I mean, I don't know. Were you able to figure that out, Gene?
I'm not positive any of those make sense. I'm starting to think it more and more that it might be Tracy, just because something that Tracy tells Chopstick later on, but the fact that people have always been leaving her.
Ah, that makes sense. You're right. She does say that at one point.
Yeah, I wish it was tagged a little more clearly so we would know exactly who it is. But it looks there's some. Her chin kind of looks the same. It's hard because I love the art in this book a lot. Although at times it is a little hard to tell who's who in a couple of instances. Mm-hmm. And again, the time frame between the van time and Bobo time, it looks like it may be earlier, especially because the van is such a hippie van compared to the late '90s where this book actually takes place. So it's a little hard to tell, but I think it might be Chopstick's friend Tracy, just because of the way she talks about how her life has always been. People have always been leaving her, and that would seem to connect back to that possibly.
Yeah, and that would make sense, and also it would make sense given the fact that of the secondary characters in this story, I mean, those in addition to Chopstick and, let's say, Mute, and even Hiroshima to some degree, Tracy is perhaps the most prominent.
Right.
Especially in terms of the action of the book. So that would make sense. But you're right. I mean, there's not much of a visual tag that tells us one way or another who this little girl may be that the mustache man is leaving. But those two scenes make up a fourth narrative time, which may even be the earliest event in this book, if you look at it that way. If it is indeed Tracy when she was a little girl.
Yeah, I don't know, because again that there is a terminus a quo, to use a medieval manuscript term, the earliest time that something could possibly be, because the first van scene. The woman in the van is listening to the radio, and the song is Gloria.
Right.
Not the 1960s song, not the Patti Smith song, but the Laura Branigan song.
Right.
So that's the earliest that scene could be. Was what 80, mid 80s or something like that. So that also would actually work better.
That was early 80s.
Early 80s, yeah. So that's about 15 years before this. So that might. But again, it could be any of the kind of the female leads at this point, because they're all approximately the same age. Mm-hmm. But that would make sense that girl might be one of them.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad that you mentioned that song, Gloria, Laura Branigan's Gloria, and not only as an indicator of when that time event may be taking place, but also it introduces something else about this book, and that is the significance of music.
Right.
Now the title of the book is The Dharma Punks, and the characters in this book, Chopstick, Tracy, especially, not only could you call them punks, but they aspire to be punk musicians. In other words, the punk aesthetic kind of defines their life in a variety of different ways. But you have that, but you also have a reference to Kurt Cobain.
Right.
That is one of Chopstick's heroes. And so the events taking place during most of the narrative, the Bobo storyline, is after Kurt Cobain committed suicide back in the early 1990s.
Right, yeah, and suicide does play it's got kind of a recurrent theme that crops up throughout the story as well.
Big time, yeah.
Whether it's I'm not sure if we actually want to say who does at some point, but someone else. But Mute is saved. Well, Chopstick thinks he's saving Mute from jumping off a bridge at one point. Mm-hmm. And
right.
We're not quite sure at that point why he's so obsessed with saving this person that until that point he's never seen before or didn't know her. But sometimes what looks like suicide might just be a different perspective, a different point of view. And literally, Mute is on the bridge because of the point of view that it affords her.
And also, and this is one of the reasons why the character Mute becomes so closely associated with another character in this book. And we can go ahead, without giving you too much detail, we can just say that the association is Hiroshima, who we never see in real time, but we only see her through Chopstick's flashbacks.
Right.
And not only Chopstick's flashbacks, but there's one occasion when Brian has a flashback with something happening. Because he spends a lot of his time in the graveyard that is right underneath and near that bridge.
Right, because Brian is a goth, so that's where you would spend most of your time, is in a graveyard.
Exactly. So, so he has that flashback, but most of the time we see Hiroshima and her relationship with both Chopsticks and the other guys is through Chopstick's recollections. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those are more sustained. In fact, there's only one place in the book where there is quite a long, I guess we can call it a flashback back to Hiroshima. And that, I think, is on page 274 in Chapter 6. And this is when Hiroshima. No. It's before that. This is 237. I'm sorry, 237. And this is when Hiroshima literally cuts Chopstick's hand and shocks him. And he goes, "Why the hell did you cut my hand?" And she points out and says in so many words that this is the pain is life. And it's what brings her attention to life.
Right, yeah. It's
that life is pain, mm-hmm. among other things. I mean, there's more to that message than that simple platitude. But, she's someone who I mentioned earlier has a big philosophical and even spiritual influence on Chopstick. And the Chopstick that we know who is telling this story is only possible through his experiences with Hiroshima and then the aftermath.
Right, yeah. And as we find out near the end of the book also, he's been holding on to kind of like a talisman from her for a long time, and eventually he gives that up because he's had to hang on to her for a long time, and eventually he decides that he needs to move on from that. But again, it's defined him, and it's kind of defined the quest that he's been on the whole time.
Exactly. So now, hold on. When you said that he gives up a talisman, what do you mean?
The note from her.
Oh, that okay. It's interesting because he does give up the note. You're right, but there's something else that he gives up around that same time, and that is that the little board that Mute leaves for him.
Right. Yeah.
And remember, he gives
the message board.
The message board, right? And he gives it up. What's a Kooky Bat? It's the brand name. Kooky Bat message board is what it's called. And he gives that to a kid. And that's around the same time mm-hmm. that he gives up that note that Hiroshima left. So again, it kind of brings together two characters that are important to Chopstick. Mm-hmm. Hiroshima in the past and then Mute in the more present, or at least in the present with the Bobo storyline. It's kind of difficult. It's funny as we're trying to pinpoint the various narrative events and the timeline in the Dharma Punks. It strikes me as a little awkward in trying to do this verbally. What do you call the Bobo event? Yeah. The Bobo explosion event. It just sounds a little silly. Or the before time with Hiroshima. But this is a very complex book. And what Sang does with time manipulation, this is one of those narratives that you really have to go back and read through it carefully 2, 3, and definitely more times than that in order to fully appreciate it. And for something this sophisticated, it strikes me that, for this to have been only 8 images or 8 issues originally, there's a lot packed into those 8 issues. There are some contemporary comics that have an 8-issue run that, it's just a relatively simple, straightforward storyline, and there's not as much narrative thickness to it. But Sang packs a lot into Dharma Punks.
Yeah, narrative thickness, I think, is a good term for it. And clearly he knew what he was doing going into this because so sometimes, especially if it's something that's a self-published thing, you're kind of like finding your way around, although this was his second series. But clearly I think he knew where he was going from ground zero because it's thick. There's narrative strands that are kind of braided that are introduced vaguely at the beginning that are teased out later, little flash forwards and things like that. So it's a really sophisticated narrative. It's not just a long narrative. It's very sophisticated in its storytelling.
Exactly. And
very confident.
Yeah. You mentioned that Sang had to have really mapped out his storyline before writing this, and I agree. But that makes me curious to read those original Filth mini-comics. I'd like to get my hands on those just to see what Chopstick was like then and what that story was about.
Yeah, actually, I should go through because I just discovered when I went back to Albany a couple of months ago to kind of do some house cleaning on some of the hundreds or thousands of books that I still have halfway across the country. One thing I did bring back with me was 2 big boxes of mini-comics and digest-sized self-published stuff from the mid to late 1990s, and it's possible that I might even have a Filth or 2 in there, so I want to go back and kind of dig through that a bit and see if I might actually have some of that stuff here with me now.
Wow. Well, let me know if you do have those.
I will.
Any of those past issues. That'd be great to see. But, in trying to, again, get back to the complexities of the Dharma Punks, the publisher of Conundrum, Andy Brown, he emailed me the other day, and he said that he was describing the Dharma Punks as the New Zealand answer to Love and Rockets.
Oh, I can see that.
It definitely makes sense to me, and not only because of the punk reference. I mean, I think that's maybe a superficial link to at least, especially early Love and Rockets. But to me, it's much more meaningful just because of the complexity of the narrative where there's a lot going on. And you see this especially after the first several issues of the Hernandez Brothers' Love and Rockets when both Jaime and Gilbert are getting into their respective storylines. For Jaime, it's Maggie and Hopi, and then for Gilbert, it's the Palomar stories. When they start to really flesh out those narrative worlds, and you have relationships built upon relationships, histories that are enmeshed with other histories, and you have something similar going in the Dharma Punks over a relatively short time period. I mean, again, this is originally only 8 issues that are now 400-some pages of a graphic novel. But there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the Love and Rockets thing because when we were talking earlier, when we introduced the idea that there are multiple time frames going here, and I said that there's no real narrative voice that leads us through. We just have Chopstick's own narration. I almost use the term uncued closure to move from one time frame to another, and that's something, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, but that's something that the comics critic Joseph Wittick coined in talking about Love and Rockets, because you'll have some stories where you'll have one frame or even on a page, suddenly from one panel to the next, you've jumped back 15 years or you jump ahead 5 years in the story, and the Hernandez brothers will because they said that their stories have been going on for so long, and those worlds are so rich, they kind of assume that the reader is going to be able to jump ahead and figure and catch up and say, oh, okay, now we've just jumped back 5 years because the narrator hasn't told us anything like that. And Wittick calls that uncued closure, and there's some of those uncued closure moments in here where we jump from scene to scene, sometimes from one page to another, sometimes within the same page, and we've just got to figure it out as we go along.
Exactly, and that I'm glad that you mentioned this, and I did know about what Joseph, did here in describing the uncued closure. But to me, the big difference between the Love and Rocket stories and what we find in Dharma Punks is that in the latter, we do have a discernible narrator, and even though the much more contemporary Chopstick is not present either in the text, in other words, like voiceovers, or visually throughout most of this book, once we see him, he's in the background.
Right.
And he's the one telling this story.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is fairly early on that we see him. I think the first time we see him is on page 20, in chapter 1. And so once we see him as the current storyteller, then we can more or less assume that every bit of information that we get in this book is going to be coming from him and from that particular
from his perspective,
temporal point of view. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, and you don't have the same thing going on in the vast majority of the Love and Rocket stories.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You know, you don't have a discernible narrator telling all the stories. Now, on a particular story, you may have someone who's telling about a past event, but if you look at the world of Love and Rockets, even just limit yourself to, you know, Hopi and Maggie in their narrative universe, there's no one overriding narrator that's telling all of these stories.
Right.
And of course, there really couldn't be.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do think that what you mentioned in terms of jumping around in time, sometimes without any indication that you're going from one moment to another, is similar in Love and Rockets as it is in Dharma Punks. Now, I think one clue as to the time periods jumping around in Dharma Punks from one to the other is the hairstyle of Chopstick. When he has very short, close cropped hair, it's his most contemporary self, the guy who's telling the story. When he has a mohawk, the events are taking place during the time of the Bobo's grand opening. When he has spiked hair, not in a mohawk fashion, then it's that earlier time when he and his friends first meet Hiroshima and have kind of an idyllic relationship, or at least it looks to be that way when Chopstick is recalling this, before, as he puts it, you know, Hiroshima abandoned them.
Right.
So I think the hairstyle is one indicator, but another indicator of a time jump often is when you see rain, heavy rain especially. We know, or we come to learn, that we're being transported to a time that takes place earlier with something that happened with Hiroshima.
Oh, that's right. I hadn't picked up on that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And it, you know, reading through the book the very first time, I know that when was it? I think it was around the end of chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken. This is on 123. When we see Chopstick and he's sleeping in his room and it's raining outside and his phone is ringing and, you know, rain is coming down really hard on the tin roof. Now, when I first saw this, before I started to pay attention to the hairstyle, you know, differentiation, I thought that the person who was calling him was the skinhead who finds his location, his phone number. Remember when Chopstick accidentally leaves his bag behind and a skinhead finds it? I thought that this was the skinhead trying to call Chopstick, because there's a phone call that wakes Chopstick up in the rain. But this is actually a flashback to that previous time with Hiroshima.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it is. But it narratively, it sets you up for that. Because those two things are juxtaposed. The finding of his address and then the phone call. Yes. But yeah, it's a red herring. And we should probably talk about the skinheads a bit, too.
Yeah, we haven't introduced the skinheads yet.
Oh, by the way, when the skinheads show up, yeah. as they're wont to do. Again, and I don't think we actually point out the reason Chopstick's name is Chopstick is because he's Chinese. So he even tells us that with a little wink. That's why they call me that. Ha ha ha. But and
as he does so, he pulls his eyes up to make them more slanty.
Right. Yeah. But there are skinheads throughout the book, and they're kind of like the skinheads are they are the Nazis of the narrative. There's nothing redeeming about the skinheads, except in one possible case, that the one student, the one younger one we were talking about earlier, who's not really quite a skinhead yet. He's still trying to figure life out. But Chopstick and it's Chopstick and Tracy, right? They're graffitiing the butcher shop, right? And they take it a step too far and actually wind up throwing the spray paint can through the window of the
Tracy does, yeah. She always takes things too far.
Yeah, throws the spray paint can through the window, and the owner actually sees them running away, but who he sees is Chopstick. And so he talks to his son, who's one of the skinheads, to say, I've seen this kid. He's going to be really recognizable. You guys have to find him, and we're going to take these kids down for all the trouble they've been causing in my neighborhood and causing my store. And so then, besides the main caper, the Bobo's caper, you get the side caper of the skinheads are going to try to or looking for Chopstick at the same time. So everything kind of all comes together near the end. You've got almost like there's a few different narrative strands, and they all come together, and the skinheads are a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were describing the function of the skinheads in this narrative, you mentioned that there was one younger skinhead who doesn't really have the stature of the others, and he's kind of, I guess, attempting to become, this hater.
Yeah.
Although he really doesn't come off that way. And he becomes, you and I were discussing this earlier, but I think we were discussing this off mic before we started to record. The first time you read this book, you may be a little thrown by the prologue and the epilogue, because you see a guy with no hair and only in a white T-shirt, and he's walking down a street, and then all of a sudden it looks like he's consumed by shadow as he's looking up. And that's the prologue. And then in the epilogue, you see this same character, the guy, no hair, and he sees the shadows all around him, and he looks up, and what are those shadows? Balloons. They're the balloons that we see that were released at the Bobo's grand opening. Now, who is this character? The first time I read this, I didn't know who it was. I thought, is this Chopstick? But no, doesn't have hair. It wasn't until I went back to look through the narrative again, and then you and I were talking about this right before we started to record, that we figured out this must be that younger skinhead. Because he's wearing a T-shirt that at one point is apparent underneath his Nazi T-shirt. He and the other skinheads are wearing T-shirts with a swastika on the front, and this young skinhead wannabe does something that pisses off the skinhead leader, and so this leader takes a knife out and just rips the swastika T-shirt off of this guy, the young guy. And so underneath he has this plain white T-shirt. So this has to be, I assume, this young guy. And I think that's important because he's the one who had been associated with this, this hate group. And we have to say that they do some very heinous things in this book, and not just chase Chopstick and his friends.
Right, yeah, it goes a lot further than that.
Oh, yeah, it's murder.
They're not cartoon skinheads.
No, exactly. But this young guy we see at the very end, when he looks up and he sees those balloons, and I don't think we want to give anything away here, but, so you have to read this book to see what those balloons are and to see the context of where this young skinhead is coming from. But I think that we can read the epilogue in a somewhat uplifting, maybe potentially redemptive way.
Mm-hmm. I think so, yeah.
And, once you and I figured out that's who this probably was in the epilogue, the book meant even more to me.
Yeah.
It had even more of an impact.
Oh, yeah. It opens up one more kind of a emotional and just a kind of a moral level as well.
Yeah. Again, a book this complex with so much going on in terms of not only the story or the plot or plots, but also in terms of its temporal shifts. I think, again, it's difficult to describe this thing, and this is definitely one of those narratives that you have to read to fully experience. Because it's one thing for us to say this is an outstanding book, but you got to read it because there's a lot going on here. And I say this is one of my favorites of 2015 so far.
Yeah, it's really impressive on pretty much every level. It's gorgeous to look at. And he's clearly having fun slinging the ink around in some places, but also he's just really in control of the story pretty much all the way through.
Exactly. You mentioned slinging the ink. That's one of the things that Dylan Horrocks mentions in his introduction is the way that Sang inks. With some of the heavy black, he says it places it even looks still fresh and glistening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very graphically striking in a lot of places, and Yeah, it's a lot of fun to look at, and again, it really does reward and even demand a rereading. I didn't have time to reread it as often as I wanted to before this podcast, unfortunately, but I will be coming back to it because it gives you a lot to think about. And we didn't even mention the other big thing that we talked a little bit about Chopstick's personality, but he's trying to be a Buddhist. He's trying to work on that. Every chapter begins with a quote from Siddhartha or something like that as well. But he's working on that. But he's trying to understand how to live in the world while you don't want to be part of the world at the same time.
Exactly, and this is where the Dharma in the title comes from. But it's not just the Dharma punk, it's the Dharma punks. So it's important to note that he's not the only one in this narrative that's associated with Buddhism or a philosophy of peace, understanding, and contentment, that all the characters, for the most part, are trying or coming from the same position. You know, Tracy, Brian, Mute, these characters, and even Hiroshima in her own way, from what we see, they're trying to come to an understanding of themselves and their place in the universe.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really almost more than anything else that really raises this above a lot of the stuff that I read, because it's really, the story is interesting as far as it goes, but it's really trying to be more about than just the plot of what's going on here. It's really trying to get it, the characters are considering deep life issues, and they do it in a realistic way, in a way that makes you, I think about your own life.
Oh, exactly. This has to be one of the most contemplative narratives we've read so far this year.
Yeah, I'm glad we did this one.
So, Gene, do you want to move on to the next title that we're going to be discussing today?
Okay, this is a big jump, but maybe not exactly, because Dharma Punks is a bit of a coming of age story in a very kind of broad metaphysical way. My Hot Date by Noah Van Sciver is a coming of age as to realizing that you're not quite who you think you are yet.
Exactly, and I like the way you made that transition. That was very effective. Both in their own ways are coming-of-age stories.
Oh, yeah, well, hey, I got a literature degree. I think about stuff.
So My Hot Date from Noah Van Sciver is published through Kilgore Books. And again, we want to thank Dan Stafford at Kilgore Books and Comics for not only sending us review copies of this, but keeping us in the know about the kind of things coming out from Kilgore Books. Earlier this year, Gene, I learned about what Kilgore Books and Comics does. This is when Kunka and I did our earlier interview with Noah Van Sciver, and I'd been in correspondence with Dan Stafford, and so he sent copies of not only Noah's work, but also some of the other things that they come out with. And just, what was it, a month or two ago that you and I were reviewing the latest issue of the Kilgore Quarterly.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so this is just another example of the really good stuff coming out from Kilgore Books, and this is one of those presses that may fly under the radar of many of our listeners, if not most of our listeners, and so we strongly recommend that you check out Kilgore Books and Comics website to find out more of the good stuff. But My Hot Date came out back in July, and, Noah Van Sciver has a really good sense of humor, and I think it really does shine forth in this book. This is a 40-some page short comic, and it's probably his most sustained autobiographic comic so far. I mean, we've seen from Noah Van Sciver other stories that are autobiographic in nature, but this is the longest.
Yeah, of this kind of thing, it's the longest thing I've seen from him. Definitely,
right. I mean, this autobiographic story, yeah, and we do see a side of him that it would be very easy to be embarrassed by.
And I think he is.
Yeah, but again, any memoir or autobiography worth its weight, has to show life even as at its most embarrassing.
And who really isn't embarrassed by their 14-year-old self?
Yeah. So my hot date takes place when the author, Noah Van Sciver, is 14 years old, and he's living in Mesa, Arizona in 1998. And it's a relatively simple story in that he is, a 14-year-old hanging out with kids about his age. I know that one of his friends, Matt, is a couple years older, and Matt seems to be, I guess I don't know if you want to call a real loser, but he doesn't seem to have it all together. He's got a cavity on one of his front teeth that looks nasty, and seems to not have much going for him. But anyway, Noah is one of Noah's friends. They hang out, and Noah is telling him, Matt, and others that he has this girlfriend that he met. What is it, on America Online?
On AOL Chat, yeah. The safest, best, most reliable place to meet a romantic partner.
And so, where we see him with his, young male friends, they're hanging out and they're trying to make sense of themselves. But one thing that Noah, the young 14-year-old Noah, has to fall back on is, he has a girlfriend and he's continuing to chat with her. But then he decides to actually meet her. And so this becomes his hot date. And what happens, I don't want to give anything away, but what happens is what you would probably expect from a setup like this.
Yeah, the only thing that could be worse is that, as his friends say, how do you even know it's a girl? It could be some weird old dude.
Yeah.
Because again, that's one of your internet tropes. And I'm trying to find this really quickly in here. When he's thinking about this, there's a great panel of, oh God, where is it? Oh yeah, this is just before the middle of the book. David was right. She could have been a scary dude while he's in bed thinking about meeting her and what it's going to be, Colleen. What it's going to be like meeting Colleen. The two middle panels on that page. First, he's thinking to himself, "Damn girl," and there's this picture of a pretty girl with hearts floating around her head that he's thinking about. My mind wandered to Colleen. I wondered what she looked like. David was right. She could have been a scary dude. And suddenly the pretty girl's face turned into like this old guy with only a few teeth saying bop. Getting the scariest guy quoting Hanson you could ever imagine. And that's a very real possibility as to who Colleen might be. Colleen is not that. Colleen is actually a girl.
Yeah.
But again, you have to read it to find out how the hot date goes. I think it's not a stretch to say, or it's not too much of a spoiler to say that hot date is kind of ironic.
Oh yes.
We can leave it at that though.
Yeah. The page that you mentioned when he's lying in bed and he's thinking about who Colleen might be or who unfortunately may be, the scary dude. On the page facing.
Oh my God, that's I follow Noah on Facebook and on Tumblr, and when he posted this next page that we're going to talk about, I laughed so hard.
Where he's looking at himself in the mirror.
Right.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful page because some of the pages actually have a little caption up at the very top to tell you anything. And this page that we're talking about here is just called Manhood. Mm-hmm. And the first panel is Noah, and as he puts it, his white boy afro staring at himself in the mirror. And again, Noah's built about how I was built at 14 years old. He's skinnier than a rail, got big glasses and everything like that. But he stares at himself in the mirror. Who does he see looking back at him in the mirror? It's literally a panel from a Marvel Comics Conan comic book pasted into the panel.
Right.
That's who he sees in the mirror, and then 2/3 of the page are taken up by a big full shot of him flexing his muscles, quote unquote,
as he's staring back at the mirror. As he's
staring at the mirror in the bathroom, wearing a towel and looking really, really fierce, but at the same time, really not looking like Conan at all. I just love this page. Because it's like I'm not sure if he really sees himself that way or he's trying to see himself that way, but it's hilarious, and it's a little too recognizable.
Right. Well, yeah. A couple things about this page is one. I do think that he'd like to see himself that way.
Yeah.
I don't think he sees himself that way. But he'd like to see himself that way. The other thing is, I wonder how he got away with using this image of Conan, and I don't see anywhere in the book that particular panel is used by permission.
Oh God,
Marvel
no,
Comics.
no! Come on, this. We're talking mini comics aesthetics here. He just does it, and it's fine.
Okay, no, I agree. It's fine, or it should be fine.
Yeah.
But this is not a mini comic, and this is something quite substantial. Now, this is not anything from Image or IDW, but I wonder if he'll hear anything about this. And the Disney Corporation, along with Marvel, I put nothing past them. So who knows?
That's true, but God love it, it's beautiful.
It is. You're right. And another thing about that page is this is very similar to the cover image we get of My Hot Date. The young 14-year-old Noah who is trying to make a muscle with his skinny arms.
Mm-hmm. Although I'm saying about that too, because on the page we're talking about, the look on his face is really fierce. His cheeks are flush with the effort of trying to make these muscles.
Right.
It's almost over the top, and on the cover it's just kind of like, yeah, here I am. Again, our cover story, the cover has at the top a true story, and then a little fake advertising blurb, over 1 million copies sold, which
I know.
God bless.
I love that.
I hope he can sell 1 million of these. I would love to see him become a millionaire off of this book. But it's a little more it's a little more showy and less determined, sort of. It's just kind of like, yeah, I am a tough guy. And in the middle of the book, he's trying to be tough. On the front, this is who he is. Look at me, man. I am so tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing I like about this comic is, we get a little the main story, which again, as I mentioned earlier, it's fairly straightforward. But there is a follow-up, and if you look at the very end, the second to the last page, where are they now? Mm-hmm. And what Van Sciver does is he gives us a glimpse into the life of some of his old friends from the late 90s. He tells us that in 2003, he writes, I visited Arizona to see some of my friends. We went to Apache Junction. The barren desert was now full of the same 4 houses over and over, and he finds his friend David. He said David was still living there at the time, and he took me to see Matt, and Matt is the one that we saw early on. He was living, Matt, in a rundown flop house with a girlfriend. He didn't look healthy. We didn't talk long. And then David, who's another friend that they hang out with, he says he had heard that David came out as gay. And then he tells us that eventually his mother had moved him, Noah, and the rest of the family from Arizona to Colorado, which is where he lives now. And then the last thing he writes, I quit skating at 19. Because I don't think we've mentioned that he and Matt, when we first see them, both of them have, and even David, they all have skateboards.
Oh yeah, it's part of their identity. It's part of what they do, because they haven't started dating yet, so they spend a lot of time skateboarding.
Yo.
Yeah, and they
also spend a lot of time saying yo.
Yeah, they clearly watch a lot of MTV raps.
Exactly.
And again, you're 14 years old. You're trying to figure out who you are. And that's one thing that Colleen even mentions, again, just mention it briefly. She kind of thought he was different when they were just chatting. When she meets him face to face, he's not quite who he seemed to be. Mm-hmm. And that was and that's the kind of like the heart of the book, because the book, like you said, it is funny, but the book does actually have a heart to it. And this almost feels like cheating, but I'm not sure. He says that it's because of who I was. I had somehow sold myself as a higher quality product than I could actually deliver. I love that. I had sold myself as a higher quality product than I could actually deliver. So it's all about identity and how you present yourself to other people. And he's not quite figured it out yet. He's trying to be something that he's not yet. And he's figuring out it's a pretty good lesson to learn at 14 years old, that you've got a ways to go. You're not who you pretend to be. You are who you are. There's pretending, but then there's real life, and real life will catch up with you.
Yeah. Well, even, and this is a little more than halfway through, as he's preparing for his hot date, he has his sister Abby cut his hair for him. And this is him, again, attempting to kind of define who he is. He's trying to come up with an identity. And he wants a very different kind of haircut. Abby tells him that what he should do is to put lemon juice on his hair and sit out in the sun so it'll bleach it. And of course that becomes, a fiasco. He sprays lemon water on his hair and it attracts bees. And so he's out there sweating in the sun and bees are surrounding him. So it really doesn't work. But he does have a new hairdo. And then another thing, and I thought of this when you mentioned this being a story of identity. We see, when we first see Noah, the 14-year-old Noah, he's wearing a T-shirt that says Icarus. Now, I'm assuming that this is a T-shirt that references the 90s band Icarus.
That would make sense.
But on the other hand...
he's flying too high.
Exactly. He's something, at least when it comes to this hot date.
Yep.
And that's one of the things I admire about this young 14-year-old Noah. He's out of his element.
But he
takes the chance. He's trying,
yeah.
Man. He's trying, yo. So I think it's no accident that we see him with an Icarus T-shirt on at the very beginning.
I saw that. It didn't pick up on it as much as I should have. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And if that was just a happy coincidence, that's an amazing coincidence because it really is the theory of one of the main themes of the book.
Mm-hmm. And, another part of this comic that I truly love, and this is probably the most uncomfortable part of the story, and this is when he actually does go on his hot date and the kind of reaction he gets from Colleen. Colleen brings a friend with her, and at one point Colleen is talking to her friend about Noah. And as they're talking, we see, and this is toward the end, we see a panel of just this, of Noah representing him as he feels himself to be at this point, a rat.
Right, yeah, it's a beautiful panel.
Yeah, it's just a slobbering rat in a T-shirt. He's wearing that necklace, what he calls his Marge Simpson necklace, with that lousy haircut.
Yeah.
And the dog choke chain.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the great thing about that panel is if you turn the page, in the same place on the second page following is one of my favorite panels as well. It's after the date, and he kind of feels himself. He's trying to hold it together, but he's coming apart, and the drawing literally comes apart on the page.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Not only is it loose, but you find it looks very unfinished. Purposefully,
yeah,
so.
And you can even tell that he's kind of repasted those last two panels down. He changed from what they originally were, but that
that's right. Yeah,
in particular, and we haven't really mentioned what this book looks like. It's drawn in a very if you're used to something, some of his stuff like it's done for Fantagraphics that's very polished. This is a much more loose, cartoony style, but it's also really, really expressive, and it's also beautifully watercolor. It's painted in watercolor. It's beautiful all the way through. But that last panel on that page that we're talking about there, when he's in the car, like the third to the last story page, he's kind of coming apart. If it's a book about identity, his identity is literally floating away in the through the panel as well. The lines that draw him are looser, to be almost non-existent. The colors are just kind of floating, kind of patchy, and they kind of move outside the frame itself. He's trying to hold it together, but he can't do it at this point. He's working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that there are sections of this book, and the page that you were just describing, or at least the panels, where you can see that he is literally pasting over previous art. And we see this in various places in My Hot Date, usually with a word or a phrase where we see that he has rewritten dialogue or this voiceover, and he kind of pastes a word or a phrase over what had been there before. And I just recently got his latest book from Fantagraphics, Fanty Bukowski.
I haven't read that yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, it's great. I just wish it had been longer because I think
he's working on part two.
Yes, I can't wait for that. But I was looking through this, and he does that a few times in Fantastic where he pastes over some of the wording, but it's not near as frequent as in My Hot Date.
I think this was done. I think he originally did this fairly quickly because I remember seeing the pages kind of show up on his Tumblr, and I was amazed at how quick these pages were kind of showing up.
On My Hot Date, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think clearly it was done just kind of. I've got this in me, and I got to get it out. But it's so well done.
It is. And we should mention that Noah Van Sciver, is up for more than one Ignatz Award.
Oh, that's right.
This year with St. Cole. So, in fact, a week from today, we're recording this on Sunday the 13th. A week from today is when they will announce the winners of this year's Ignatz.
I wish I could be there. I miss SPX.
Yeah. Yes. Let me jump in. Speaking of XPS, saying that Andy Wolverton and I will be at XPX next weekend. So that will be the 19th and the 20th. No, not the 19th. I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm looking at the wrong calendar. The 19th and the 20th of September. I was right. So if our listeners happen to be at SPX, definitely try to seek us out and say, hey, I listened to the podcast. We'd appreciate that. But getting back to My Hot Date, this is a really good comic, and I'd like to see more of these kind of longer, sustained autobiographical pieces from Noah Van Sciver.
Yeah, and it's good because it's really focused as well. It's like in the 90s, there was like the autobio boom and stuff like that, where people just kind of tell any story. It's again, like I said, it's about 40 pages long, but it's focused on a pretty specific event. So he really was able to build character stuff and work with kind of like the psychological obsessions and things like that in a way that works really well. That wouldn't work if this was like in the 90s. This would be like a 5-page story in an anthology or whatever. It just wouldn't work. It really has the time to breathe and to really kind of build its world, and it's beautiful that way.
Exactly. Oh, and also before we leave this title, I do want to mention that the very last page is this listing for him, top albums of Mesa, Arizona, 1998. And some of these are referenced in the book itself, but we have Korn's Follow the Leader, Tupac Shakur's Greatest Hits, Garbage version 2.0, The Beastie Boys' Hello Nasty, Smashing Pumpkins' Adore, and Offspring Americana.
So I think we need to put together a Spotify playlist, if he hasn't done so already, to music to read this book by.
Yeah. He also mentions other notable CDs from the period from people like Fatboy Slim, Limp Bizkit, Cake, Macy Playground, and Sublime.
Yeah, and again, like I said, people are quoting lyrics throughout and stuff like that, or there'll be like slight references to music all the way through.
So another link between this and Dharma Punks, the music link.
It's a comics tapestry on the Comics Alternative today. Everything weaved together.
Well, something that is quite a bit different from what we've been discussing is the third title we're discussing today, and that is Tokyo Ghost #1. This is written by Rick Remender with art by Sean Murphy, colors by Matt Hollingsworth. Let's start off by having me ask you a couple things. First, Gene, what did you think of issue #1 of Tokyo Ghost? And then second, kind of a broader question, have you been keeping up with Remender's various titles from Image? Because I know in the past you and I discussed that first issue of Deadly Class. But that's been a while.
I don't even remember that one. Deadly Class?
Oh, was that not with you? I thought it was.
What was it about? I don't even remember. That title doesn't ring a bell for me.
Class of Assassins.
I don't think. Oh God, maybe that was a long time ago.
Yeah, in fact, I'm doing a search on our website, and that was. Oh God, when was it? I'm pretty sure that was with you.
Okay. Well, I recommend it's a name. His is a name that I know of, but I do not follow at all.
Yeah.
So it's not a thing.
Okay, so you basically answered that second question of mine. But what did you think of issue number 1 of Tokyo Ghost?
It's trying real hard. I don't know. It's a futuristic tale. The very end of it. Let me see if I can grab this. He's got a text page at the very end where he says that he considers it a mashup of. Oh, and I just lost my thing. Here we go. Too many notes. That's he considers it a mashup of the Road Warrior, Judge Dredd, and 13 Assassins. Yup.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what it is, and it really feels like it. It's like, really, this is just kind of Judge Dredd with more drugs.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's trying to hit all the right current popular notes about information overload and tech addiction and things like that, but it's really, really trying hard. Too hard for me.
Okay.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it, and I think what Remender and Murphy have done in this first issue is to set up a very complex narrative world, or at least they've started off this way. Because the first time I read this issue, I didn't understand much of what was going on. Then I went back to reread it, and I got a much fuller sense of the characters, the events, the context. So my guess is that after this first issue setup, that things are going to start coming together in a more cohesive way with issues number 2, 3, and subsequent.
It really is an introduction to this world, and things change at the end of it. Definitely.
Exactly, because we see on the very first page we're given the time and place context. It happens on the Isles of Los Angeles in the year 2089. And so that tells us a lot there, that not only is this futuristic, but it's the Isles of Los Angeles. And so there's been some kind of catastrophic event of some sort.
Probably global warming.
Global warming could be also human generated as well in terms of war, because we do hear references to that. So whatever's going on, Los Angeles is now a series of islands. It's not part of the continent anymore. And so that's the setup that we have here. It is, not a very pleasing world, to say the least. In fact, it's the kind of existence that people escape, but they escape it through technology. And the kind of world that is this technological escape hatch, so to speak, the way that our narrator, I guess we can call her our narrator, Debbie Decay, she describes it, and also Remender does in his afterword at the end, introducing this title to everyone, it's like, how does he put it? This kind of opiate that online life, and we see characters throughout this issue that they're looking at multiple screens, and one of them who's looking at multiple screens is Debbie's boyfriend, whose name, or one of his names, is Led Dent, L-E-D Dent. And he constantly has these hovering screens in front of him. So the technology is such that people can, so to speak, tap in to the online world and keep up with social networks, social media, television programs, and whatever else they do online through these screens that appear right in front of them. And it consumes their lives, and the outside is completely shut out. But it's the only way, we sense in this first issue, for people to live in this squalid world.
Yeah, it really is. Technology takes over Led or Teddy, who seems to have both of those names for some reason.
Oh, in fact, I just saw that reference in Remender's afterword of this first issue. He calls it our collective home opium den, the internet. And so, yeah, and it... part of me wonders if the message here about online life is a little heavy-handed. but I'm waiting to see how this plays out in subsequent issues. And one of the reasons why I say this, I recently was listening to another comics podcast, and the guys were actually interviewing Remender, and he was talking about this title, Tokyo Ghost, and he was saying some of the same things that he says in this afterword. You know, that people become lost in the internet, that now we live in a time where we can't live without our mobile devices. He's really pissed off when he's in restaurants and people can't go several minutes without looking, you know, at their iPhones to check to see if anybody's tweeted them or if they've gotten any email. And, you know, if this series is going to become a sounding board against this kind of technology, then it won't be as enjoyable as I hope and expect it to be. So, but I don't expect that to be the case, and I hope that this overall message, you know, internet bad, you know, it consumes our lives, and we need to get back to, you know, as Albert Brooks put it in, not real life, Lost in America. You know, we need to get out and touch Indians. You know, if we need to give up our internet and go out and touch Indians, you know, if that's the main message in this, I'll be a little disappointed.
Well, he does say that in that text piece that they're headed towards the last tech-free nation on Earth, the paradisiac Garden of Tokyo. So if Tokyo is tech-free and it's a paradise, that's kind of where he seems to be telling us that's where he's headed.
Right. And you're right in saying that this first issue is a setup for what comes next, because we do learn that Debbie has agreed to do this one last job. Now, we ought to mention that both Debbie and her boyfriend, Led Dent, and we also find out that his name, I guess, is Teddy, her boyfriend. They're constables, and they work for the Flack Corporation. And the Flack Corporation is this big tech company that actually controls a lot of this online media. And so they're going after someone that's causing problems for the Flack Corporations. This villain's named Davy Trauma. And so most of the action that takes place in this first issue is Debbie and her boyfriend Led/Teddy going after Davy, and they eventually get him. But we learn from Debbie that she's agreed to do this really big job because after they're able to get rid of Trauma, who will no longer be a threat to the Flack Corporation, then they have satisfied whatever commitments they had with the Flack Corporation, and they can go off and do their own thing. Where are they going to go off and do their own thing? Tokyo, which is one of the world's last tech-free zones.
Right.
And so I'm curious to see how this series will play out beginning in issue 2. Because my guess is that Tokyo's not going to be the Eden or the paradise that they expect it to be when it comes to technology. I just expect that. And so that's why I'm wondering if this series is primarily a bat with which Remender and Murphy are going to, you know, beat off a message, so to speak. That's not the best way of putting it. But you use it to hit us over the head with a message about some of the problems of online existence right now, today in our current times. You know, again, I'll be a little disappointed. I don't expect it to be that way. I hope it doesn't turn out to be that way. But I think that's the main setup that we have in this first issue.
Yeah, and it's yeah, you're right. I mean, if it really is just a tech-free a paradisical wonderland, that's not really good drama, and that's not really what you built the series on. So there's going to have to be some sort of conflict once they get there, obviously.
Oh yeah, exactly. But, you know, even though this is a lot packed into this, actually a regularly sized issue, some of the things that we've been seeing coming out from Image Comics, #1 issues are oversized. I know that when you and I were discussing Wolf the other week, those were really oversized issues. But this one is a regular size, but there's still a lot really packed into this regular size.
It's still about
#1 issue.
Almost 30 story pages, so that's pretty packed.
Yeah. I like the setup, but I tell you what I absolutely love about this first issue is Sean Murphy's art.
It's kind of got a Kevin Nolan thing going.
But, you know, I really like what he has done several years ago with Joe the Barbarian, and then after that with The Wake and Punk Rock Jesus, his own title. I really have come to love Sean Murphy's art, but there's something about his art that nicely supplements Remender's storytelling in Tokyo Ghost #1. There's a lot going on both in the story and in the art. It can be a little confusing, and that's one of the reasons why, not just because of the story, but also because of the art, I felt that I needed to go back and reread this again in order to understand better what's going on in this first issue. And the art is a part of that as well. And I'm not saying it's confusing art, but is fast-paced art, and there are parts of Murphy's visual storytelling that needs to be digested more than just more than one go through.
Yeah, and my mistake reading this the first time was reading it on my iPad, and it took me a while to realize how many of these pages are actually double spreads, where a panel will spread across 2 pages, and so it was a little confusing reading it on an iPad. Digitally is not the best way to read this.
Yeah, and we should mention, when we haven't yet, that issue #1 of Tokyo Ghost comes out this week, and so when this podcast episode does go up, issue #1 should be out, but you and I got a advanced copy of this in PDF format. And you're right in that I did originally read this on my iPad, and in going back and rereading it a second time, I realized that some of the pages are 2-page spreads, and that the way that I read it originally is a little different from what I realized going through the second.
Right, yeah, there are a significant number of double-page spreads. This really needs to be read, if not on a giant screen, then in paper is the best way to read this, definitely.
Oh, exactly.
Because he really takes advantage of the broad canvas of the double-page spread going through. Because some of those panels, like the the Death Race panel, but again, Death Race, that's not even a nod to them. That's just a steal from other movies. But the panel itself is just chock full of people and craziness. And I swear to God, I see the Mach 5 and Racer X's car. Except the Mach 5 has got a number 7. But if you grew up on Speed Racer like I did, there's a 2-page spread starting around page 9 and I think 10 and 11 or 11 and 12. I swear to God, right in the middle of it, that's the Mach 5 and Racer X's car, just with different numbers.
And around that same place, there are other visual tip of the pen, so to speak, to other comics I'm looking at, and this is PDF page number 11. This is around the time of the Death Race. We see in the foreground 2 people playing what looks like a pinball game. And the title of the pinball game is Black Science, which is another Remender book currently ongoing with Image.
See, for me, page 11 and 12 are the Mach 5 page. I don't see Black Science anywhere. Oh, up at the top there. Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder if that's him, one of them looking at the game itself, because that looks like it could be It looks like a more contemporary person than a futuristic person.
Yeah, it does. Who knows? But I just think the reference to Black Science there is nice, along with Speed Racer that you see as well. So yeah, I do think that this is a very intelligent first issue, and I think it's a great story setup. I'm interested to see how this plays out over the first story arc.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Again, it didn't really win me over, but I would read one more to see where it goes next.
Would you say that this is a title that, at least after reading the first issue, is for you better in the trade?
It's really hard to tell, because again, there's so much of this. This is really it's a complete story, even though it's setting up something else. This first issue really does give you an actual story, which a lot of first issues don't bother to do anymore.
Right.
But again, for me, it's just a little too over the top in trying to be in your face and trying to push a lot of buttons and saying how edgy and cool it is. Like the weird Abe Lincoln thing that we have happen at one point. It's like, I know I'm supposed to laugh at that, but I just kind of look at that and go, this is just kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to see what the next few issues are like, and I'm definitely on board for this.
Yeah, I'd be curious to check out the next one to see if it calms down and tries to focus a little more on developing rather than shocking.
Yeah. So, it may be an interesting segue from Tokyo Ghost, which deals with, contemporary issues of identity and online media. Go from there to the last title that we want to mention for this week, and that is issue number 16 of FutureFantasteek. And we should mention that the title is one word, and it's spelled Future, capital FANTASTEEK, exclamation mark. Do not forget the exclamation mark.
Yeah, so it's not French, it's scary.
That's and it's issue number 16. Now, this originally came out in January of this year. And the reason I found out about this, I didn't know about this comic before, and I'm assuming you didn't as well?
No, I didn't.
Okay, but the author, and I believe this is the sole author, maybe I'm mistaken, got in touch with us about a week and a half ago, Jackie Batey, and he wanted to know if we are aware of this. I don't know if I want to call it a comic.
It's more of a zine.
A zine, yeah, and that's the way that Jackie described it. He was wanting to know if we were interested in reviewing this zine, and I checked it out, and I thought, okay, this is fascinating. This is interesting. I wish I had had enough time to go back and look at some of the earlier issues of FutureFantasteek.
Yeah, because these are up on issue, right? ISSU?
ISSUU, yeah. So it is. And the reason I mention I wish I had more time is because I've looked at the website. In fact, if you want to check this out, the blog, this is based out of the UK. The website is FutureFantasteek, without the exclamation mark, .blogspot.co.uk. And if you go to that blog's About page, this is what you'll find. FutureFantasteek brings together a trichotomy of investigation, art zines and independent publishing, artist as social commentator, and drawing as a means of immediate visual communication. Drawing, I said, not drawing, drawing. The series explores obdurate boundaries between journalism and authorial illustration using satire to reflect notions of Britishness, and they put that in quotes. The series can be read as a sequence from just prior to the credit crunch through the age of austerity. The series is independently published as a limited edition art zine with 2 issues per year. The approach is experimental, incremental, and reflective, focusing on both the microcosm and the macrocosm of living in the UK. So, and then there's more in this About page that I don't want to read through, but I just wanted to highlight that first part because according to this web page, the About page, one of the ways to fully appreciate Fantasteek, this art zine, is to read it sequentially. So I can get a sense of what it's about from issue 16, which you and I read for today. But I think that our listeners, if they want to check out what this is all about, can fully take in, issues 1 through 15 as well as the latest, which came out in January.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense. I wish I had thought to check out the earlier ones beforehand.
Yeah. Now, but I think that looking at number 16 by itself is definitely possible and very useful because this does seem to have a sense of cohesion all of its own, although it is very experimental. So now other comics that we've looked at today, Dharma Punks and My Hot Date to some degree are a little experimental, but this is very experimental. How would you describe issue number 16 of FutureFantasteek? It's
a good old fashioned zine. There's some cut and paste stuff. There's manipulated imagery. There's found imagery. There's a fun kind of a fun with typography to give us like little advertising or self-help quotations from page to page. You're not looking at this for a narrative. You're looking at this for kind of like a bullet-like communication, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh, it is. And if I were to find a common thread that runs throughout this issue, part of me says that it may be online identity or online communication, but it's much more than that. I think it starts off with several references to the internet. On the very cover, for example, you find what looks like a cat head peeking over this message. This looks like a Windows message that says error 404, whatever you want cannot be found. And you see both an OK and a cancel button. And you see something similar over the first half of this issue, where there are references to searching for something online and you're not being able to find it. But then after that, that seems to fade into, after you get this reference to the Google algorithms. There's this one page that says, Google algorithms protecting you from reality. Now stop fussing about climate change and do some shopping. So, very sarcastic, very tongue-in-cheek. But then after that, you don't get as many references to the internet. It seems to be a manipulation of advertisements and also other media. One of the things that I found was very clever is the way in which the author Batey has taken a book, and I don't know if this is an actual book or not, and has redrawn it to where it means something else completely. Do you know what I'm talking about? This is
your pea brain ain't grand.
Yes, exactly. This is a book that was originally titled European Painting and Sculpture by Eric Newton. And what Batey has done is to black out some of the letters of this title, write in some others to where it looks like your pea brain ain't grand, and then new on remarkable manifestations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's from the Library of Withdrawn Books #2, which is funny. It's a fine British Pelican book that's been remixed.
Yeah. And that's what especially this last half of issue number 16 seems to be, and that is an exercise in remixing. Taking images, in this case, a book cover, or let's say certain communication tropes, advertisements, and reworking them, mixing them up to mean something completely different. So, for instance, on page 13 of this PDF, it looks like an ad that you might find in an office space. It says, Human Resources present Stress Buster, bring your cat to work day. And, but this is something like you would find in a business, right? That their human resource office is trying to make work palatable. And, but the way that this is drawn is just ridiculous. You see this guy and a cat, and the guy seems to love his cat. And then underneath that, you have what looks like another cat spitting up hairballs.
Right, yeah, because anybody who owns a cat, who lives with a cat, knows that the hairball thing is not a stress buster at all. It can be a stress inducer. When you hear the roar, you know what's coming. It's like, oh God, let me run to get the paper towels as soon as I can to see if I can stave this off before disaster happens. And inevitably, the disaster happens. Exactly.
Yeah, and then on the page after that is another one of these examples of the mixing up, because you have what appears to be a page of a book, and I don't know if this is the chapter at the very top. It says Ancient Lights and Enemy Action, and then drawn on top of this is this weird-looking figure. It looks like his head and hands are made of, I don't know, red leaves or flames. I don't know what the hell those are. And this character is saying, is anybody out there? And this is drawn on top of this, I guess, found object, a page from a book. So...
yeah, the more I look at this, the more I look at that. The first time I read it, I was like, yeah, that's kind of cool. But I don't know what to say about it. But I really want to go back and reread all of these now. Like a couple pages after that is what I think my favorite page is. And every page has a little different tagline up at the top. The top
header,
tagline
right?
For this one is the header is, "Why did I come into this room again?" And the main story is Wiki your memory? If not, why not? Never struggle to remember anything ever again. Easy in, easy out. Information goes easy in, easy out, and memories automatically delete in 6 hours. It's like, yeah, if we're all supposed to rely on stuff, and I mean, I do this now sometimes too. I don't need to remember that because I can always find it later if I need it.
Exactly.
So it's really, she's really building into that kind of culture of just let the technology take over. It will make your life so much easier. But if your life is that much easier, what are you actually doing anymore? Which seems to be one of the themes of the book, is that if you're not doing it yourself, what are you left with?
Yeah.
And then, because this is just about pretty much the last thing that we see that she's actually written is Wiki your memory? If not, why not? Never struggle. And the person next to the never struggle to remember anything again just says, duh. That's all you're left with. If you don't have to think it for yourself, you have no thoughts left.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely an incisive and sharp-witted issue, number 16 of FutureFantasteek, and we strongly encourage you guys to go back through and not only check out this latest issue that came out just in January, but also the previous ones. And again, you can find this at the zine's website, futurefantastique.blogspot.co.uk.
Or even just blogspot.com. That works as well.
Oh, that works as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's looks like there's a lot of there's even been some collections of the zine as well. I was just checking on the website and on the issue page, and there are compilations and stuff. And she's got a lot of other like little they look like public service announcement sort of things. The Safe Cigarette is another zine. It looks like I want to spend a lot of time looking through all of this stuff at this point.
Yeah,
this looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, Jackie, thank you very much for alerting us to FutureFantasteek, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate Kat at Image, Dan at Kilgore Books, and Andy at Conundrum, because without you guys letting us know about and sending us copies of the books that we discussed today, we couldn't have done this show. Yeah, keep them coming. This was a good mix of stuff this time. We started off with Ant Sang's The Dharma Punks. After that, we moved on to the latest autobiographic comic from Noah Van Sciver, My Hot Date. And then after that, Tokyo Ghost #1, Rick Remender and Sean Murphy. And then we wrapped up with a look at issue number 16 of the zine FutureFantasteek. Yeah, this was tons of fun. Yeah, had a great time. And if you want to have a great time with comics, then you definitely have to visit the website of our sponsor. And our sponsor is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. It's the best place to get your funny books. You can't go wrong with those guys. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about the stuff you're about to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find on the right-hand side of your browser a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can record a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. But if you want to be a little more difficult about things, then you can contact us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly at Derek@comicsalternative.com. And Gene, how can they get in touch with you directly? Gene@comicsalternative.com. And I'll just throw in a little quick note for my Comics Machine Tumblr as well, comicsmachine.tumblr.com. That thing is still going. I've passed the 2/3 mark of this year. A new comic every single day, whether it kills me or not. So get in touch with Gene and congratulate him on reaching that 2/3 mark. You can also contact us via Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs. You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google Plus, and on Pinterest. We even have a YouTube channel, so you can hear our podcast episodes that way.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, and when you do, please be sure to leave us a rating and review. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes as well as our comics-related reviews and commentary that we post on the blog. And that's on the website, comicsalternative.com. A lot of ways of getting in touch with us, Gene.
All the internets. We own all the internets.
That's right. And we're there for you, our dear listener.
We do it for you.
That's right. So let us hear from you. And until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
We'll see you later.
Take care.